I have the unique privilege of serving as the president of West Kentucky Community and Technical College. As I was sharing moments ago with our governor, it's a unique privilege for me to serve. Last week was my second year as president. Half of my staff still can't believe I'm president. The other half worry how I got the job in the first place, but good. Governor, you know, I'm sure that you hear pretty much on every occasion how unique colleges and community technical colleges are. I would tell you that we do serve in a unique capacity as the only 4-time top 10 ranked. There are 1,100 community and technical colleges across the country, and we have consistently ranked in the top 10. So that is very, very important for us. Yes, sir. Thank you so much. We are also unique as the only community technical college in the country. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary with the University of Kentucky College of Engineering. So students getting chemical and mechanical engineering with over 371 graduates during that period of time as well too. So we do believe that we fully embrace your vision for this great Commonwealth with engineering and manufacturing at the epicenter. It does indeed give me an honor to introduce our governor and welcome him here to West Kentucky Community Technical College. Governor Matt Bevin is a husband, father of 9 children. He's a veteran, small business owner. In his first term as governor, he has shown an unwavering commitment to fiscal responsibility, working tirelessly to strengthen and stabilize Kentucky's financial foundation. And through initiatives like red tape reduction and Kentucky Trained, Kentucky Built, he's worked to make the Commonwealth the hub of excellence for engineering and manufacturing in America. Governor Bevin is committed to investing in education and workforce development, reforming foster care and adoption, creating a healthier Kentucky, protecting those who protect us, and creating open and transparent government. Once again, let's give a welcome to our 62nd governor of Kentucky, Governor Matt Bevin. Thank you so much. Yes, indeed.
Step over here.
Yes, sir.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Reese, I appreciate you. I really do.
Yes, indeed.
Let me put this down on my chair here real quick.
Yes, sir.
So what we will do, we've got a couple of wonderful announcements to make here, and you're going to hear plenty from me in an open forum here in a moment. I want to thank you all for coming here. Seriously, some of you all work here, so it was easy. You were already here on the property. Others of you have come from somewhere a ways off, and our whole schedule was off. This is our entire cabinet of the Commonwealth is here. Every one of our cabinet secretaries, so there's no question, and we get to that point, that you will have, that there won't be somebody who's an expert in that or with the responsibility of addressing that area of state government. And we have been out here in Western Kentucky, starting the day at Lake Barkley. We literally all were just inside of Eddyville, had a cabinet meeting there, took a tour of that facility, met with a number of the employees there, and again have had an occasion to then make our way up here. So this is a Western Kentucky kind of day where many members of the state government are here to hear from you, to meet you, to understand personally the concerns. I appreciate those of you in the media that are here as well. This is pretty unusual. I don't think there's ever been a full cabinet of the Commonwealth in the history of Kentucky that has ever come, certainly to this facility. I know there's never been one that has ever gone to Eddyville or even to have assembled prior to this year in any one of our state parks at the same time. So these are the kind of things that we're trying to do to touch the pulse of who we are in Kentucky. But I just want to say, as an introduction to a couple that will follow me, there's a couple of tremendously exciting announcements that are going to be made. A couple of public, one is a public-private partnership, one is the role of our Department of Local Government getting engaged in this community. And so what I'd like to do is, again, I'll be back and have an opportunity to speak to you at greater length, take whatever questions you have. But I want to introduce Don Parkinson. Don has the responsibility, he's worn a number of hats, but has helped to shepherd a program as the secretary for the official name I always forget, Tourism and Arts and Heritage. I always get them mixed up in terms of the order. But the tourism part, and specifically the part related to some of the magnificent waterways that we have, is part of the catalyst for what you're about to hear. So I'm going to ask Don Parkinson to come to the stage. Please welcome him, and he's going to introduce another special guest with an exciting announcement.
Well, good afternoon, and it's been a long time getting here, but as you all know, better than about anyone, what a big challenge we have here in Western Kentucky with Asian carp. And we've been working on this thing for quite some time. And so this started all the way down in Louisiana a long time ago, in Arkansas, and now you have Asian carp all the way up to the Great Lakes, and we've got to do something about it. And you can't poison them out. We're going to have to find a way to fish them out. So that's what we're working on. So we've looked at one solution was let's catch all the fish we can, dig a hole, bury it. And that was going to cost $3.5 million a year and waste a lot of protein. Didn't think that was a real good idea, but that was one of the ideas on the table. The other one, though, is the one we need to have and pursue. We're very confident in is to create a fish house. And so what we're going to do is we have an incentive in there. The governor has put up some money for this to make this whole thing work. We're going to have what's called a fish center, and it's going to go out and buy all the fish that fishermen can bring in and at a marked price. We're going to give an incentive to the fishermen to make sure that they keep coming. The big problem we have right now is we don't have a steady stream of fish. The good news about Asian carp is that it tastes good. The bad news is it's killing off bass and crappie. We've got to find a solution to move this thing forward. So that's what we're doing. And so what we're going to do is, I'm going to pleased to announce right now, Angie Yu. Angie has been in the fish business for a very long time, 15 years. She immigrated here from China a long time ago. She knows the fish business very, very well. She's a great operator, and she is going to be the person we're going to support to make sure this whole thing works. So with that, Angie, could you come on up here? I think a lot of these folks already know you, but come on up.
Thank you. Okay, I'm short. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Governor Bevin. Thank you, Secretary Parkinson. You know, our Fish Center, Kentucky Fish Center, is honored to be a part of Commonwealth's Asian Carp program. You know, as a new, proud Kentuck, I'm so excited. You know, at the same time, I strongly feel the obligation and the responsibility for me to do something to run the business right. You know, Asian carp pose a serious threat to our tourism, to our ecology, and our economy. I think this program, this partnership, is the right it's an encouraging step in the right direction. For our fish center, for me, for our employees, we believe this is a challenge and as well as opportunity. Asian carp, because Asian carp can create jobs, they can bring in investments. And the most important thing is a healthy, delicious food. Not only for our local people, that's for the world. So anybody here never eat Asian carp? Please be brave. Taste it.
I will vouch personally, I have eaten it, and it is, if you like white fish, it was remarkably good. I didn't, frankly, have any idea what I would expect. It was tremendous. It really was.
Yeah, thank you. You know, tasting is believing. Please try it. You will like it. You know, in these fishes for 1,000 years, Asian people and also European people, they eat Asian carps. There is an old saying in our country that if you want to be smarter, you eat fish. Like if you want to know, numbers really well, just eat the fish head soup. Scary? Is it scary? Okay, anyway, this is a big opportunity for us. It's a big market, it's a huge market, waiting for us, not in the States, also worldwide. I strongly believe we can eating this fish, beat this fish by eating them. For the fish house, for the fish center, we will work closely with our local fishermen, the processors, distributors, and also exporters. So together, I think we can beat the fish, we can create jobs, we can set up an industry. We can turn this problem to a profit for our local community. Okay, our mission is reduce, reuse, and redefine the Asian carp. Thank you. Oh, no, thank y'all.
What I'd love to do is, I know some in the media have to take off here. I want to answer any questions that you have, and anyone from here. We have another announcement as well unrelated to this. But we will talk about that in a moment. What questions does anybody have? Let me clarify a couple things. This fish house is going to be the state working in a public-private partnership, coming alongside folks that are already doing what we're talking about. How many millions of pounds will you harvest and process this year?
This year, 2 million.
2 million.
Yes.
Okay, the intent is over the next 5 years to take that up to 20 million. There is absolute demand in the marketplace for this. There is no question about it. It's a function of whether we get them in and they're able to process them, then the ability to get them to markets overseas and potentially domestically is absolutely in existence. So this fish house is the state coming alongside and saying, what can we do? As Secretary Parkinson mentioned, we had an original proposal where the government would have solved this by taking $3.5 million a year to bury tons and tons of fish. But the expectation was at its peak we might have been able to move as many as 5 million pounds. So 5 million pounds at $3.5 million here for a fraction of that, where the state will subsidize what the market is already bearing by giving fishermen an extra 5 cents a pound. Currently, your market rate is 17 cents a pound, is that right?
Average about 20 cents.
20 cents.
Yeah.
When I was there the other day, they were paying 17, so it's gone up.
17 is for silver.
Okay,
But
for
we have
silver.
Grass, we pay 25.
So depending on
average
what, if you
about-
like to fish, the bottom line is this: a two-person crew could make, if you fished 240 days a year, you could make $200,000. And so this is a lot of money. If you enjoy fishing, this is a way you could make a lot of money doing it. Because if you're making 17, 18, 19, 20 cents a pound, plus the state's coming alongside 5 cents a pound, plus the fish house gets 4.8 cents a pound, the amount of money that the state pays is a mere fraction of what would have been the case if the state took on the whole responsibility. And our ability to process many, many millions more pounds a year and to be able to find a productive use for these is the whole purpose of this. This is what public-private partnerships are supposed to look like. And I truly, Angie, I'm grateful to you because you pioneering this in many respects, taking the risk, putting capital at play, and already expanding. How many of you have been to, or at least driven by, the fishery where they process this fish? So a lot of you all have. How many of you have never been inside this place? A lot of you all. I would encourage you, it smells like a fish processing plant. Beyond that, it's fascinating. It is remarkable to see how these fish get processed and people come in. So with all that said, this announcement, this ability for the state to come alongside and to jumpstart this, and Angie and her team are running ads in the paper. You see this at the bottom. This is for real, and there's tremendous amounts of money to be made. What questions can we answer for any of you here, any of you in the back? Yes, sir.
So logistically, how would it work? Are we talking about, will someone pick up the fish from the lake and take it to the fish market in Wickliffe? Is that what we're talking about?
I'll let you speak to that.
Yeah, we have different ways. We can collect the fish at the lakes. we are going to have a tender boat, a collection boat around the lakes. And also we plan to set up a 2 prep house at the lakes. So in this way, it's convenient for fishermen, just ship it to us local, not need to drive to Wycliffe, spend an hour.
So will they have to be connected directly with your fish house, or can any commercial fishermen sell their fish?
Any commercial fishermen are welcome.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Contracted or are they independent?
They are independent, a contractor, yeah.
There was, when I was there the other day inside the facility, there was a gentleman who I believe was 71 years old.
Yes,
Who pulled
yes.
up with his, dually pickup truck, bed full of fish and coolers full of fish. And I don't know how many hundreds of pounds of them he'd caught. And he and his wife, and she sat there and said, this is what he loves to do. And he just unloaded them, made a bunch of money, and drove off. And he said he'd be back in a few days. And so, I mean, the reality is, this is independent. There is no obligation or contract. You could do it a little bit. You could do it a lot. But if you truly wanted to make a living doing this, you could make a ridiculously good living at this. You really
Yes.
could. The ability to earn 6 figures fishing, and I don't know if any of you have been out on the lakes, finding enough of them is not the problem. That's not the problem we have right now. They'll jump right into your boat if you're not careful, so. Other questions from anybody about this topic? Yes, sir.
I am a commercial fisherman, and I know a lot of other guys that are commercial fishermen that are doing this on a daily basis. And there's nobody that's making any money just fishing for these carp. Every time you buy a boat, a truck, and nets that cost $300 a piece that are torn up after a couple of weeks, you can't make any profit selling fish at 15 or 20 cents. It's just impossible to do. It's not as easy to catch these things as what everybody is saying, and we don't see thousands of them jumping into our boat every time we go out.
Sure.
The trucks that you use are $50,000, $60,000. A motor's $10,000, a boat's $15,000, $20,000, and $300 worth of nets. And if you go out and catch 1,000 pounds of fish and tear up any equipment and then drive down to Wycliffe for $150, what have you made? I don't see anybody. I know some really good fishermen, and I've been doing it for 30 years. There's nobody out there that's making $1,000 a day in profit. Now, they may go out every once in a while and make $1,000 in fish, but by the time you put all your gas, your
Sure.
equipment, and, it costs you $150,000 to even start fishing.
And this is a good point. I mean, this is a voice of reason and life experience. But here's what I also know. If the market bears 17, 18, 19, 20 cents a pound, and the state's putting another 5 cents on it, for 23 to 25 cents a pound, there are people that will find a way to maximize the inefficiencies that you've described, the opportunity cost, the
Yes.
barriers to entry that you described, and there will be people who find a way to monetize this in a powerful, and that's what this is. It's an incentive. The government isn't going to fix it. No individual is going to fix it. But there are people who are already doing this, others who will make some of these investments and find ways that we don't currently have that exist to catch these fish in non-traditional manners. We're asking in large measure for the market to seize this opportunity. And some will be able to take advantage of it, some will not. But this is a way for us to come alongside and say, what can we do to help give this a launching ability? And that's really what we're trying to find at this point. So your point is well taken, it really is. I mean, you're doing it for 30 years. It's a voice that knows what it's talking about. But I also know 30 years ago this wasn't a problem. Now this is an opportunity. And as Thomas Edison once said, most people in life miss opportunity because it usually shows up in overalls and looks like hard work. And this will be hard work. It will be.
Yeah,
But I'm
yes,
confident there are
yes.
people that will figure it out.
Uh,
Truly am.
yeah.
Yes, sir. I'm a vice president of Two Rivers Fisheries, and I think this gentleman had a very good point. And but on the other side, we got a lot of orders. We got a lot of big orders. I'm currently working with Alibaba and Jack Ma, and if they start to order, it has to be 5 million pounds of ground fish. So that's why the state program, this Kentucky Fish House, is so important that it's a chicken and egg. If we don't have enough fish, we can't deal with the big guys. We can't talk to Kentucky Fried Chicken because they need a lot of fish. So I think whatever this program is, it's definitely a very encouraging step toward the right direction. And hopefully we'll be able to get, as a state, 20, maybe 1 million, 5 million, 10 million tons of fish. And then we can really enterprise and market this thing as a core product. Right now, it's just a little trial here and there. But I understand the fisherman's point, but I truly believe this is the right step to go.
Again, you get enough scale, it will justify the kind of investments
just a-
where it won't be mom and pop
chicken and
type operations.
Yes.
So,
I think also the Asian carp problem is a very big one. This is our first step. We're looking for other solutions as well. This isn't going to do everything that needs to be done, but it's the right first step right now. And we'll see how we have to adjust going forward.
Yeah, like fishing, I'm not a fisherman, so I know it's a lot of labor consuming right now. But in Asian countries, we never use gill net for the Asian carp. Wildlife Department and we have been working, try to find, a right way, a new way for fishing, so can be more profit, for the fishermen. We try that. But so far, not work yet. But there are many people are working on this, try to find, unified ways to fish.
You know all the same people that I know, and you know how hard they work. And how
Yeah. It's really hard work.
And
Yeah.
if you can't do something else with with the other fish that you catch and have things open up to you, it's just impossible with, things costing as much as they do right now to fish for fish that cost, they're worth 20 cents.
but for those for whom it's too expensive or it's not worth it, they won't do it. For those who think that it is, they will. And that's the way things change. We can complain about what doesn't work. We can talk about the impossibilities of things. We can make no change. We can offer no solutions. Or we can try, step by step, one fish species at a time, one fish house at a time, one public-private partnership at a time, to try to change the trajectory in a way that is a win-win situation. There is no guarantee. Absolutely not. The work will still be hard no matter how the fish are ultimately caught. And some people will want to participate and some will not. Other questions, any concerns, thoughts? Yes, sir.
Question about will there be multiple locations for the fishermen to, sell at the lake, and where will those locations be?
Yeah, multiple locations. We try to set up a few collection points along the lakes.
Do you know where those locations will be yet? Or
So far, we are working with the 4 county around the lakes. We had a meeting already. We are still looking.
Is the intent then to be,
Yeah.
it'll be somewhat driven by the market. The people that are participating, the people that are catching fish, where will they want them? Where do they need them to be to avoid, to your point and to yours as well, the need to drive all the way to a different part of the state, down in Wickliffe, to be able to unload these fish? Let's make it easy.
And one thing we've done to accommodate that is that Park System has a $100,000 ice maker near the water, so that they can come in with their catch, ice it, and go back out again if they don't have a full load. So
Yeah.
that'll help, and you get a higher percent of successful hunt out of it.
Other questions? Outstanding. Here's what I would say. Seize the opportunity if you care to. Share the word with those that would care to. Let's see where this goes. And if the market doesn't bear enough, if the market demands more in order to justify it, then what we do know for a fact, to your point, is that there is a demand in the marketplace. Literally.
There's
Huge demand.
And actually, we're trying to, right now, we're selling, most of our fisheries are selling them as a frozen fish, which is a very primitive stage. And right now, we're working to make them into ground fish, will be much value added into it. But in order to get to that point, we need to have the economy of scale. You can't just sell to 100. You need to really big economy of scale. So that's why I truly believe this is the right direction. But I truly understand what this gentleman said. It does merit. Yeah.
You know, it's difficult, it's not easy, and if you're doing it in a small, one-off way, it probably wouldn't cash flow itself, wouldn't justify.
Once we're going to sell to Kentucky Fried Chicken, and we're gonna pay them 50 cents. Seriously, that's how it works.
And you thought it was only chicken. Any other questions on this topic? Angie, thank you so much. Truly appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
There's some steps over here. I tell you what, while I will use this opportunity then to introduce the next individual who will make an announcement. The Department of Local Government, and again, check out your local paper, more information. The Department of Local Government is known to many of you. It is a conduit of my office that has existed for years, long before I was in this office. It's a way in which the governor of the state has the ability, using monies that are available, largely from federal sources, but from a variety of different sources, state as well, to be able to deploy, to invest in certain particular projects that enhance a community. It could come in any number of shapes, sizes, and types. And so our director for local government in this state, the commissioner, is Sandy Donahue, perhaps known to some of you in this room. Sandy has been tireless in her efforts. What we have done differently than some previous administrations is we've truly been all over this state. We have tried to do things, has nothing to do with politics, has nothing to do with geography, it has nothing to do with which is the most influential or squeaky legislator. All those things have historically been parts of the process, but we're looking for where are there projects, where are there communities where a small amount of money can make a profound impact. And so one such project has come to our attention, and Sandy is going to announce that. And again, good news for this community. So please welcome Sandy Donahue.
It's awesome to be back in Paducah today. Thank you for such a warm welcome. Every time we visit this community, we go back to Frankfort with ideas of things that we can do to help. So today is not so different than a day approximately a year ago. We were able to come down to Paducah, make a few site visits, look at several projects. We actually went to Wickliffe, but on the end of the trip, we stopped and had a visit with Judge Leeper, who said, hop in the vehicle with me, I have something I want to show you. So Judge Leeper took us out to show us the old landfill property. And he showed us his vision. He showed us what's happening there. He showed us how the county's been able to invest small amounts of money to repurpose what would be considered a blight in most communities into some very exciting opportunities. He has a bike course out there. If you haven't tried that, I would certainly challenge any of you to do it. It's an endurance type course, and apparently it's used very, very frequently by the youth and even older people in the community. There's a fantastic walking trail. We were there in the morning, and there were numerous people who were out walking. They can walk the Paducah Greenway, and then they can come into the old landfill property, and there's trails, and there's soccer fields, there's sports fields. There's whatever you need for a wholesome family environment that's being made from what would have normally been a blighted property that people would consider something that should be discarded. So Judge Leeper showed us one impediment to the further development of the property, and it was an access bridge. It's a pedestrian bridge that would actually connect the property to the City of Paducah Greenway space. And he didn't drive us over there because there was a bridge that wouldn't hold us and his vehicle up, but he showed us what he needed to do and what his vision was, and was able to get an application into us, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So what we're here to announce is $100,000 for the McCracken County Fiscal Court to proceed with the construction of a 110-foot-long prefabricated pedestrian bridge. But it's not just a $100,000 investment. We have to look at the total overall investment, and it is multiplied many times over by what the county is doing out there every day, as they have a little bit of money, a little project that they'll do. They'll match this investment with approximately 20% of cash and in-kind dollars. The project will include signage and some landscape type development to make the area more attractive. So again, it's an honor and a pleasure to announce this award to the McCracken County Fiscal Court. And it's good to see Senator Carroll here, who's been instrumental in keeping in contact with us to make sure that the project didn't fall off the radar. So we're very pleased to have the opportunity to announce this investment in this community today. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandy. Again, these are simple things, seemingly, but they'll be profound for the people that avail themselves of it. I want to thank as well, in addition to those of you who took the time to be here, I want to thank Dr. Reese for just making this facility available to us. Thank you for your passion. Many of you know him, know his story, but I had not fully appreciated the number of years that he had been here before he went away for a number of years before he came back again. And I'm just grateful to you for that, for the vision that you've brought back, the sense of energy, and what a perfect time. I mean, really, there has never been a better time. I'm going to just make a broad statement about what my vision is for this state, and then let's open it up to whatever questions you have about anything, literally. Any topic, any question, any issue. This is your time for the next hour or so to talk about things that you need and want to have done. So to that end, let me just briefly talk about what my vision is for this state. Dr. Reese alluded to it in his opening comments. Let me just ask a question. Some of you have perhaps heard me ask this question, but for those of you who have not, let me give you a hypothetical situation. If you wanted to engineer and manufacture something, anything at all, engineered and manufactured to the highest degree of excellence, and you had to do it in a single country in Europe, where would you likely start? Germany. I mean, it's the only name that I heard come out of anyone's mouths, and it's probably what popped into the heads of those of you who didn't even say anything. Is that really the only country that you could do it in? Of course not. You could do it in Switzerland or France or Belgium or the Netherlands or Italy or whatever the case might be. There's any number of places you might do it, but Germany immediately came to all of our minds as the place to engineer and manufacture something to the highest degree of excellence. Now, why is that? Because for decades and decades and generations, they have poured into and invested in that type of a vision. So let me ask you a question. If I were to ask you the same thing, if you wanted to engineer and manufacture something to the highest degree of excellence, you had to do it in a single state in the United States. Is it as easy? Truth be told, some of us would say Kentucky because we're from Kentucky. And while Kentucky literally could be a very justifiable and defensible answer, so too could any number of other states, including many that border us. Quite easily, if I were to ask you to write on a note card the state that you think is the most likely to be the place in America that you could engineer and manufacture something with excellence, we'd probably, in the course of picking those up, find easily 10, 12, 15 different states. This tells me two things. Number one, it's not as simple as it was when we asked the question about Europe. This tells me that what? Nobody owns it, like Germany owns it. As instinctively as we think of Germany, we don't instinctively think of a single state. So if nobody owns it, what else does that tell us? It's available for ownership. Kentucky's going to own it. That's it. That's the vision. It's not that complicated. It's been said, and you've heard it as well, that without vision, the people will perish. It's true for an institution of higher learning. It's true for a community. It's true for a state. It's true for this nation. It's true for any organization that you're a part of. The reality is there needs to be a vision. And the vision that I have that is shared by the cabinet officials that are here, by increasing numbers of people, including university presidents who understand it, embrace it, and realize we're already well on our way, is that indeed Kentucky is as well positioned or better positioned than any state in America to truly be the center of engineering and manufacturing excellence. It's not that complicated a vision. That's the beauty of it. It's not overly complicated. It is a simple vision. We're already doing it in many respects. Some of the very students, whether it's the 371 coming out with specific engineering degrees associated and coincident with the University of Kentucky, or whether it's other degrees and or certifications coming out of here, the more than 8,000 students a year who come through this institution. It is folks like that that are already helping to create this in our state. We are the number one per capita producer of automobiles in America. Number 3 overall. number 2 producer of aviation and aerospace related components in the nation. And that's second only to Washington State because of Boeing. So we're already doing this in some measure. Petrochemicals, pharmaceuticals, there's a variety of things that are being engineered and manufactured, medical devices, a tremendous number of things already being done here in the Commonwealth. But if we focus like a laser with our resources, with our energy, with our abilities, to take advantage of something that is several-fold. Number one, the entire pendulum of manufacturing is shifting back to North America for many reasons. Geopolitical uncertainty and unrest in other places, the kind of incentives and tax structures, cutting corporate tax rates and things of this sort, and capital gains rates that are allowing people now to repatriate hundreds of billions of the trillions of dollars that have been kept overseas by global companies, now being repatriated to America. And as those hundreds of billions of dollars come back, they're being invested in communities large and small all over America, including here in Kentucky. And it is those dollars being invested that create the kind of cash flow for a community that's critical. Because when somebody builds from the private sector a new building in this community, who benefits? The school district does. Because those property taxes pay for monies that go into our school system. Who else benefits? The roadways in that community, the monies available to people in the fiscal court to be able to make decisions about matching 20 cents on the dollar for the type of project that was just announced. Things that enhance people's quality of life. When jobs are created in a community as a result of those investments, those people are living here. They're spending their money here. They're building their lives and the futures for their children and grandchildren here. These are simple things, but they're doable. We're already doing it. And as surely as we all thought of Germany, why is it that Germany should be able to own it and we shouldn't? I want 5, 10, 20 years from now, certainly, that if this was a person asking a room full of people in Europe, if you had to engineer and manufacture something the highest degree of excellence, you had to do it in a single state in America, where would you go? I want Kentucky to be as instinctively in the minds of people in Europe at that time or wherever as Germany was in all of our minds. I've asked this same question in Asia. I was in a meeting at the embassy in Korea asking a room full of about 85 different business executives from different Korean companies. I asked them the same question about Europe. Every one of them said the same thing. So globally, Germany is known as the center of engineering and manufacturing excellence. This is really what we can be. We are doing it. We need to absolutely focus on this. And if in fact that is the case, how extraordinary that will be for us. I'll make one final comment as it relates to what this potential could look like, and then we'll take whatever questions you want. Think about this. At the end of World War II, and there's some in this room that were alive at that time, perhaps young, perhaps just starting out, but it wasn't that long ago. At that time, Kentucky, Tennessee, and Indiana, 3 states all in connection to one another physically, all of us also at about the same size as one another, all about 40,000 square miles, plus or minus a bit. We're literally right in between those two in terms of land mass size, but also geographically. We all had about the same population. We had slightly more than one, slightly less than the other, but in 1942 we were all roughly the same size. What has happened since then? And bear in mind, we have better geography. We have better rivers, better roadways, better railways, better seasonality. We don't have the extremes of the heat in the south or the cold in the north. Better proximity to everything. More arable land, certainly, than Tennessee has. And yet what has happened in the last couple of generations? Both those states have now 50% more people than we do, or nearly. We're at about 4.5 million. We've incrementally grown. They've grown like this. They now have 6.5 million people, plus or minus. Think about that. What if we had 2 million more people in this state? If we had 2 million more people, just 30 or 40% of them paying taxes, could you imagine if we had 600,000 or 800,000 more taxpayers, the things we could do? Everything you care about, every project you would want done, both in the local communities and at the state level, the ability to fund pensions, the ability to fund education, the ability to fund our law enforcement, and all the other critical components of what we expect and need and demand of our government could be easily attained These states around us have been eating our lunch, truth be told, for years because we have been dormant. And as Will Rogers, who is known to some of you, the old cowboy poet, once duly noted, he said, even if you're on the right track, which many in this state have argued that we were, so why rush it? We're doing fine. But he made the astute observation. He said, even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. And arguably, that's what we've done. We have sat still as others have moved forward. With our antiquated tax policies, antiquated labor policies, antiquated pension policies, antiquated fill in the blank. And we have allowed ourselves to become dormant, and shame on us. We're better than this. So the vision is a simple one. It's an attainable one. This is what we have been focused on in this administration. And we are seeing changes for the first time in a long time. Just this most recent quarter, on an annualized basis, only 2 states in America had higher job wage growth for jobs in Kentucky than Kentucky did. Let me clarify that again. Only 2 states in America. They happen to be big energy producing states. They were Texas and Louisiana. They were the only 2 states in the nation that had higher annualized wage growth at the end of last quarter than did Kentucky. We've never been in the mix. We've had 46th per capita income in this state for 2 generations. More than 50 straight years we've been stuck at 46th. That's starting to change. It isn't just the fact that we have more people working than we've ever had, that we have lower unemployment than we've ever had, that we have, frankly, more jobs available than we've ever had. It's the fact that they're paying more than they ever have, and more by relative comparison to any other state except for 2. These are the kind of things that are starting to change. A quarter, a year, even 3 or 5 doth not an eternal trend make, but the trajectory is changing. And these are things we should be encouraged about. That is the whole purpose behind focusing on things, not for political reasons, but by doing what's right in the communities where we get the best return on the taxpayers' money. What questions, concerns, thoughts would you like to share? There are 2 microphones, but if you don't want to make your way to one and I can hear you, I'll repeat the question to make sure everybody else does. So if you raise your hand, I'll just call on you where you are if you have a question you'd like to ask. This isn't just like a Baptist church in that nobody wants to sit in the front, although this is pretty good on this side. It's like the participation here. I promise there's going to be no altar call here. You can participate if you'd like. Questions on anything? Yes, sir.
Governor, thank you for coming, first of all. I would like to rebut some of your comments about higher education. I understand the financial challenges that you have and that the state has. I would suggest to you that your goals are predicated on a quality education.
No question.
And I can tell you from personal experience, I deal directly with the community college here as well as the engineering school. Those institutions are in danger of losing their credibility because of the current financial situation. I know full well it was necessary to start cutting funding for the community colleges and the higher education facilities in the state during the recession. It's my understanding that today only 2 states remain that have not started to rebuild some of that financial support for higher education, West Virginia and Kentucky. I would simply ask you, sir, that in developing your educational funding plan, that it should be a holistic plan that goes all the way from kindergarten through graduate education, because we're leaving out the top piece of the pie right now.
That's a good point, but let me ask you a question before you sit down, if you don't mind. You said you wanted to rebut things that I've said, but I didn't hear either what I'd said or your rebuttal.
In the sense that I think a lot of your goals are predicated on having a strong education.
Absolutely.
And we are in danger of losing that ability right now.
But what have I ever said that you want to rebut that would disagree with that statement?
Well, I think your actions, for example, the higher education funding last year took a 4% cut again, year after
Everything in state government did.
Every year
Correct. I've been here for 2 years of that. And so it's been going on for more than 10 straight years in this state and nearly every other state in America. And your point is well taken. It really is. And so I appreciate it. I really appreciate the comment. There's not a chance we could attain what I've stated as a vision. Not a chance if we don't plow into education. In fact, there's two things we have to plow into, one of which was evident even from the earlier conversation from this stage. The two things that will separate us as a state from being a better version of what we are compared to what we are today, as well as will separate us from being better by comparison to the states around us or any state in America, are two things. Education is one of them. Infrastructure is the other one. That's it. If we don't pour into those two things with absolutely everything at our disposal, then in fact we can't possibly be better versions of ourselves to the degree we'd want to be or relative to others. So your point is spot on. I don't know that there is any disagreement whatsoever. But the question that, correct, but understand this. If I have $1, just say it's $1, and I have $2 worth of demand for that dollar, not everybody gets everything they want. And that is the sad reality of where we are here in Kentucky. The actions that have been taken by many for a long, long time have led us to a point where we have ignored problems that have been building. It was exacerbated, to your point, at the time of the downturn in the economy, but that was hardly the only reason. We've ignored many, many issues. And as it relates to higher education, indeed, there has been for post-secondary education, which is what you're alluding to, there have been cuts for every year for the last 10, 12 years in this state. I'm not the only governor that's done it, but I've done it as well, of necessity. You think I wouldn't love to be the governor? Here's why we would have reversed that. You know how I could have reversed that and done what other states have done, which is what they're doing? Not fund the pension. I'm the first governor in the history of this state to ever fully fund the pension system. The only governor that's ever done it. I'm also the only governor since the lottery was put in place that has not swept those funds for anything other than education. I've also put more money into education, not only in absolute dollars, but on a per capita basis for K through 12 education than any governor in the history of Kentucky. Those are all absolute financial facts. So as a proportion relative to anything before me, relative to promises that have been made to people, and relative to obligations that we have, there has never been a governor who took education more seriously. There is a narrative that would tell you otherwise because people are offended at the idea that they're being told the truth for the very first time, that the pension system itself is in tremendous peril. It happens to be comprised of hundreds of thousands of people, some of whom are in education and many of whom are not. But the billions of dollars that were put into that, do you know the amount of money that we saved by 4% cuts in higher education was a minuscule fraction of the $3 billion that last year alone we put into the pension system. Had I not put $3 billion in, let's say we'd only put $2 billion in, we could have increased spending by 4% and still had hundreds of millions of more dollars. But that's called irresponsibility. And that's what this state has gotten from people in this job for decade after decade after decade. We have not been paying our bills. We've not. And when you don't pay your bills, just as in a family, and some of you have your own businesses, how many of you have your own small business or work for a small business? So a number of you, quite a few, especially over here. These individuals know that when there is only X amount of dollars left at the end of a given year, you don't get to necessarily make the capital expenditures, hire the people, or increase the payroll, and or buy the new truck, and or provide better benefits, or whatever the case might be, because there is no money to do it. This state has bonded projects. How many of you have been to an office park somewhere in Kentucky, there's no one in it, but there's weeds growing through the lots? How many of you? Seriously. Many. The reality is this state has pumped billions of dollars through the years into false promises, poorly thought out objectives. We've wasted money. We've failed to fund the pension system. We have done all of this at the expense of the very thing that you and I agree has got to be focused on, among other things, and that is education. I have 9 children. They're between the ages of 8 and 19. Of course education is critical. It matters very much to my immediate family. 3 generations of my family have been educators. There are multiple, between my grandmother, my father, my siblings, multiple degrees in public education, many years, in some cases careers spent, decades teaching public school. I understand this. I get it very much. We're in absolute agreement, but the bottom line is the piper needs to get paid. And for a long time in this state, we haven't paid the piper. And now, although it's painful and it's not fun, I said this earlier, I did a town hall last night. It'd be great to be the governor that just kept ignoring the pension problem. Imagine if what if I just put in $1 billion like past governors have done? And the other $2 billion I'd spent on all these things? You all would love me. I'd be the most popular guy. And the financial solvency of the state would be continuing to trajectory itself straight into the toilet. We owe people better than that. The financial truth is painful sometimes. Thank you. Other questions? Thoughts on anything? Yes, sir. Bob.
Governor, I didn't want to interrupt anybody's questions, but I also didn't want you to leave here without me saying thank you. Obviously, for today's announcement, Commissioner Dunn did come out. I didn't walk her through the poison ivy, but I think she's willing to go. If I had asked her to, she really wanted to see what we were about, and it's a project that we're working together with the city of Paducah to connect the 2 facilities. It's going to be a very significant change in our community. We do continue. We've got another part of that project is going to be completed at the end of this month out there in the Pike Trail. We actually have a group of kids that are training out there now for national competitions.
That's awesome.
Facilities. And Secretary Snavely, it's an old landfill site. So instead of just bush hogging it and hoping something doesn't happen, his folks came in early on, did the testing to make sure it was safe. We appreciate that very much. They used, the very first time they used some of their new equipment to test it on our site. And we got a clean bill of health before we continue.
Bob, we owe it to have dialogue. We owe it to have conversation. We owe it for people to have this level of communication and direct contact with one another, for people to see things directly, to hear things directly. But we have to be honest with one another as well. I mean, you look at this flag here. I mean, this is true enough. We see it so often, we don't always take it, to heart. But you look at what's written here. United we stand, divided we fall. This is the reality of it, not just for these 4 counties, not just for this state, but for more critically, us as individuals, as citizens of this state, as people who are passionate about education and infrastructure and economic development and health care and the social environment and all of these issues that draw us to this place at this time, all these issues that impact our daily lives. We have to be united as much as we can, but we have to be honest with one another. And again, I have been in these forums and I've heard people say, why aren't you cutting the grass and the medians on the highway as frequently as you used to? And that's a good question, because I'll tell you truthfully, that's a big pet peeve of mine. When I was young, I worked for the state highway department, and these are the kind of things that bother me. You could tell a lot about a state, I believe, by a couple of things. What the medians look like, what the sides of the roads look like, what the rest stops on the highways in parkways look like. And so it does bother me, but it gets back to the same thing we were discussing a moment ago. The reason they're being cut, say, 4 times instead of 6 or 8 or whatever the case might be is because of money. If we had an endless amount of money, if we continued to ignore things that have been ignored for decades, we would have money for this and we'd all feel good. But it wouldn't be the truth. And the truth is painful. Nobody's asked about it, but I know for a fact it's a question that people have. And I know as soon as I leave here, as I'm leaving, people will say, I didn't want to ask this in front of everybody, so I'm going to ask it. What's up with the pension system? What's going on with Senate Bill 151? Let's talk about that for a brief moment. Because there are people in this room, I'm not going to ask people to raise hands because it put people on the spot and it's not the point, but there are people in here who A, have strong opinions, B, have no opinion, C, are somewhere in between, some who think they fully understand it and may, others who don't understand it at all. We're all over the map on this issue. People don't know whether they should be for it or against it. Is 151 good for the pension system or good for Kentucky? Is it bad? Is it good for taxpayers? Bad for taxpayers? What about people that are retired? What about people working? What about our ability to attract future employees? These are all questions that people have asked and continue to ask, not only amongst themselves, but in forums like this. So let's talk about this briefly. Why does this even matter? Why is the fact that I've put more money into the pension system and am the only person who's ever fully funded it material? Because without it, the system is going to fail. And in reality, even with it, the system may well fail. It is on a trajectory to fail right now. That's discomforting. That's unnerving. That makes people scared and nervous and afraid, and it should. But it's the truth. And the truth has not been told to people about this for a long time. A defined benefit plan, which is what we have for our state employees. And how many, just out of curiosity, how many people in this room are either retired or are working right now for the state with the expectation that you will be a retired state worker at some time? Okay, please put your hands up high. This is a good thing. So I would say probably 20% maybe of the people in this room, 15 or 20% based on those that raise their hands. So this is specifically germane to you, but truth be told, it's germane to all of us. Because every single one of us benefits from the things these folks have done or are doing. Every one of us uses the roadways. Every one of us is availing ourselves of social services directly or indirectly. Every one of us is educating our children and grandchildren in the systems directly or indirectly. All these things affect all of us. Healthcare, all these things. And 100% of taxpayers are paying for it. So everybody is in this boat. So what about it? Why is it that there's any change structurally or otherwise that needs to happen? When a defined benefit plan was put in place, I was actually looking to see if there was a whiteboard here. I figured in an educational institute, there's probably one right behind here, but I'm going to just humor me and allow me to use my hands. But think about this. How does a defined benefit plan work? When these were put in place decades ago, 30s, 40s, when these things first came into place, there were as many as 30 people working for every retiree, and then 20, and then 10, and these numbers were very supportive of a system because the very first people that retired up here were being supported by all these people down here at the bottom of the financial triangle. And they were all paying into a system so that when a person got to the point that they retired, their savings, the earnings on those savings, and all these people down here complementing that allowed them to retire over the course of their natural life and to be able to receive a defined benefit over that time. That's how a defined benefit plan works. That's what it actually means. And it worked when there were 30 and 20 and 10 people down here. But as it became, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to 1, there are now more retirees in the state pension systems in Kentucky than there are workers. It's inverted. It's over. It's been broken and over for decades. But nobody's been honest about it, especially in the last several years. I'm not going to ask you to re-raise your hand if you were one of those that did earlier, but if you happen to be in KERS non-hazardous, which is the largest plan, the one that has the most people in it, the one that most likely some of you are members of, that will run out of money on the current trajectory we're on, despite the funding that we've been putting into it, in 2022 or 23. maybe 24, depending on what happens in the market. The next 5 years, plus or minus, it's going to be gone. The money is going to be gone. And you say, well, they better find it from somewhere. It's going to come from higher education. It's going to come from the highways. It's going to come from law enforcement. It's going to come from all the other things we expect, need, demand, and pay for our government to provide for us. Or people are not going to get the retirement checks that they think they're going to get. There's only a finite amount of money that the state gets. Unlike the federal government, we don't get to print it. We can only get government money into this state in one of two ways: through taxes on people that are here volitionally and are paying taxes, or by borrowing from the future, sticking this onto bond debt and letting our children and grandchildren deal with it while we play now. And we've done a lot of that too. Hundreds of billions of dollars that we have borrowed from the future, with no real thoughtful analysis as to how that money was going to be paid back. That has changed. I shouldn't say hundreds of billions of dollars, billions of dollars. Let me clarify that. Many billions and billions of dollars, the sum total of which I'd have to go back and add up. But many, many billions. And bear in mind that our state's budget, that includes dollars we truly have control over as opposed to federal dollars that flow through here for Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera, amounts to somewhere in the neighborhood of about $11 billion a year. So about $11 billion, not even all of which is truly at our disposal. The amount of pension obligation that we have already that is not funded, conservatively, is about $60 billion. And the irony is I hear people say, oh, it's too high, because that makes us think it's not that bad a problem. If we use realistic assumed rates of return, the likes of which we've actually gotten, not the ones we wish we had gotten or hope we'll get, but if we actually use the kind of returns that we've gotten, we have a debt obligation right now that is unfunded that is about 5 to 6 times our total income as a state. If we took every cent that this state generated for the next 5 to 6 years, didn't incur any more interest on the amount already owed, didn't pay 1 cent to anything in this state, not 1 cent, put all of that money and nobody left, and everybody continued to pay taxes because they don't mind that there's no education or law enforcement or road work or anything of this sort, but they all stay here and pay just as they are now, and we took 100% of that money and put it into our unfunded pensions, we would just get back to ground zero in 6 years. This is the kind of problem we have. We have the worst funded pension system in America. There is not another state in America that has a worse funded pension system than us. And understand this, there are half a dozen different plans, really a couple more than that, but 6 broad categories. And they involve KTRS and KERS non-hazardous and hazardous and legislative and judicial and CERS. And they're all varying degrees of funded. A number of you work in the private sector, have worked in the private sector. There's something for, how many of you have ever worked for a company, either in the past or currently, that offers, how many of you in the past, and there's a number of retired folks here, worked for a company that wasn't a public entity that offered a defined benefit plan? So a number of folks. I mean, there's actually 2. Okay, that's sobering in its own right. How many of you currently work for a private sector company that offers a defined benefit plan? Nobody. Again, why is that? Because it can't be paid for. Because this demographic reality exists everywhere in America as baby boomers have aged. So a defined benefit plan only works when this is possible. When that's the case, it doesn't work. So how then is that money going to be paid off, given the fact that I'm the only governor, as I said, that's ever fully funded what's called the ARC, the actuarially required contribution. The ARC is not what keeps it fully funded. The ARC is considered to be the bare minimum necessary to keep it from falling farther behind. And yet no governor has ever done this. The previous governor in many years didn't even do 50% of that number. Spent money on all sorts of things that made him very popular and people were happy about, while he was screwing them financially if they were part of this state. And trust me, everyone's a part of it. The single-digit number of people that are going to get a pension and the 90-something% that are paying for it, everybody suffers by this dereliction of duty. And so the net result of this is that we now have a system that is underwater. It's painful, it's hard, but how do we get out of it? People say, well, we need to hire more people. It isn't possible. For those of you that are in the KTRS plan, right now, the active teachers right now, 38% of them are fully eligible to retire. They may not have hit the 30, they may not have hit every metric they want for themselves, they may not be at a point in their life that they want to, but they could retire and start drawing benefits. Right now, 38%. That's the same for a whole lot of our other areas as well. So if you have 35, 40% of people in the state currently working for the state capable of retiring right now, we don't have another 35 to 40% that are just starting. It's not barbelled. It's 35, and then the next tranche behind it might be 30, and then 25, and then 20. We have a much smaller number at the bottom end, driven in large measure by the fact that we don't need as many. The reality is people aren't flocking to this state. This isn't Texas in that regard. We're not building tons of new schools, and we don't have thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of new students demanding that we have new teachers and new buildings and facilities, new roads, etc., because we've been dormant, because we've been stagnant. All of this is hard reality. But understand this, let's think about this for a moment. How then do we come up with $60 billion? Or whatever the number. Pick your tens of billions multiple that you want to use. Where are we going to come up with that money? It only comes from taxpayers or from borrowing from the future. Those are the only two options we have. And if we are actually paying as we go, which is our obligation to you, and is the way you run your own business and run your own family households if you're fiscally responsible, is how we should be running government, not sticking it to the future. That means something has to give, and things get cut. And the fact that it was only 4%, truth be told, sir, is because in large measure we have been scrambling everywhere we can to try to be as prudent as we can with the limited amount of money across the board. We didn't play favorites, and things were uniformly cut. But I'll tell you, this administration, the executive branch in this administration, has seen cuts multiples of that every single year. The reality is this team is doing things more efficiently and more timely than has ever been the case. So it is possible to run a better operation in the case of centralized government on less money, but it's hard. It's not easy. People work hard. All of this to say that we've got a big financial problem. When I say the system will fail if we're not careful, I'm really not exaggerating. Where's that money going to come from? The PBGC, which steps in, I asked earlier how many work for the private sector in a defined benefit plan. The PBGC, which is the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corp, steps in the private sector when there is a pension plan that is considered at risk of failure. They step in, they seize that plan by law, they shut it down, and people get paid out 15 or 20 cents on the dollar tops. These days, it used to be as much as 20 cents, now it's 15 cents or less. There is no equivalent of the PBGC in the public sector. There should be, there needs to be, because people have been whistling past the graveyard for a long time. And these systems have been failing. Do you know what percentage that the federal government by law mandates that a private sector pension plan be seized at if it falls below a certain threshold? Does anybody have an idea what level they consider to be irreversible, that a system has failed and it will be shut down by federal law? Anybody know what that level of funding is? It's 80%, 80. We don't have a single plan even close to 80%. Our best funded are somewhere around 60 or a little less. KTRS is about 52.34% funded. KERS, non-hazardous, 16% funded, 1/6. By law, if we were a private company, the federal government would have seized these plans and shut them down, and people would have gotten next to nothing once we got below 80. There has never in the history of the world or of America or of defined benefit plans under any structure anywhere been a plan as poorly funded as ours is that has ever been saved. Never. We're not trying to do something they did in this state or in that country or with that company. We're trying to do something that has never been done, that financially may not be possible, that actuarially and statistically would indicate that it's not possible. But we're trying to do it anyway because we have a legal and a moral obligation to people to the extent of our ability to be able to fulfill the promises that were made to people. And so this brings us back to Senate Bill 151, which is a fairly innocuous bill. And yet people have been told to line up against this and root against their own survival. It only promises two things, simple things, which, let me just be clear, aren't even beginning to fix the problem I've just described. But they stop some of the bleeding. Senate Bill 51, which is right now before the state Supreme Court, does two things, two simple things. It says that future employees don't get the same benefits those of you that are retired or currently working get. That's one thing that it says. People are outraged at that. People that are in the system now are outraged. Said, how dare we not offer the future things that we can't afford? Even though we know what the result of that is by looking at where we are now. If we promise, and I'll come to the second thing in a moment, but if we promise people in the future the same benefits we now have, you are guaranteeing that not only will the current workers and the current retirees, but those future workers will never see these things. They won't. It's not financially possible given this. The other thing that it says then is, where is the money going to come from? If there's never going to be a reversal of this, and there's not, how are we going to get the money to pay these tens of billions of dollars that are owed? Senate Bill 151 requires what is called level dollar funding. That says that the next governor and governor after that and governor after that for the next 30 years, regardless of whether they want to or not, and the next legislatures for the next 30 years are required to take that $60 billion, break it into slices of 30, and pay it every year whether they want to or not. Have to pay $2 to $3 billion a year whether they want to or not. Again, I'm the only governor that's ever done it. The odds that you'll find another governor willing to do this and take the kind of grief that is taken by being honest with people and paying our bills is not high. Most people who aspire to this job like to be liked. They don't want to take on hard things. They don't want to take the heat from people, and they don't want to pay the bills. And I base that on the fact that for the last 200 years, that's largely what we've seen, certainly for the last 50 to 60 in this state. So the odds that you're going to get another governor that's willing to do this and actually pay the bills is not high. So this in 151 demands that they do it whether they want to or not, whether it's popular or not, whether there's people asking them to increase spending on things that we have no money for or not. It decouples the politics from the fiscal reality. And so it says future people don't get what the current and former people got, and it says the state for the next 30 years is required to pay billions into the system whether they want to or not, and those two things are in that bill, and there are many people in the system who are demanding and hoping and praying for and writing letters saying that this should be struck down by the Supreme Court. If you're in the system and this gets struck down, you will not get what you think you're going to get. You're not. Because where's it going to come from? Understand this too, this isn't East Berlin. We can't force people to stay here. There's no wall, there's no fence. How many of you, and you are out in this part of the country where you see it, how many of you know a company, have worked for a company, have an employee that's with you now or used to be, and or a person in your family who knows a company and works for a company that used to be here in Kentucky and is now in Tennessee? How many of y'all? A few of you. The reality is that's one state that borders us. There's people that go other places because they can. Why have they gone there? Because their tax structure is better. These are things we have to be honest with ourselves about. So Senate Bill 151 says no more false promises, and we're going to pay it whether we want to pay it or not for the next 30 years. And that may well get struck down. You may have 7 people who are going to supervene and take the responsibility of the legislature, which did their job, not their whole job, but part of it, and an important part, to say we're going to at least stop the bleeding. That doesn't decide where the next $60 billion is going to come from other than over the next 30 years. And if the Supreme Court strikes this down, they are putting the final nail in the coffin of this. Because what do you think the appetite will be for your legislators after the way they've been treated to do this fairly innocuous thing that doesn't do any harm to anybody currently in the system? And the amount of grief that they've taken, and the vitriol, and the pickets and the boycotts and the nasty language and the foul behavior. What do you think their incentive is going to be to go back to the well and do it again? Not high. I can tell you that right now. Do we have legislators in this room? Danny Carroll is one. Do we have any other members of the legislature here? I mean, is this going to be number one on your list of fun things to do next? Probably not. And yet the reality is we've got to fix this. Because if we don't, it affects everything else, including our ability to pay for everything else we care about. Right now, how many of you work in county government at some level? So you understand, I mean, a number of you all. Talk about your budgets. I mean, seriously. Do you have the ability to meet the obligations? You have $1 to spend, and how many cents on top of that do you put into paying pension benefits for people that aren't even employed anymore? Many, many dimes for every dollar you have to spend on everything else. At the state level, it's 84 cents. For every dollar we spend on running the state, we spend 84 cents to pay for people that aren't even working anymore. Think about what we could do with that 84 cents. If we have $11 billion, right now, pension obligations right now in Kentucky, and it's ratcheting up like this, are in excess of 15% of our entire state budget. Again, a single-digit number of people are going to pull that benefit out, but it consumes more than 15% of our budget. In the next year or two, it will be more than 20%. In the next 5 years, it will be 35% of our state budget. Of all the money we have, paying for people that aren't working. And why is this the case? I'll give one final example, and it's important. I'm beating this in some measure because I want people to understand what's at stake. Let's take one example. And for those of you that raised your hand, some of you maybe made more than this, some of you made less. But let me just pick a number, and if you made less than this, dial yourself down, and if you made more, dial yourself up. This is for illustrative purposes. Let's just say you worked for 30 years. And you made $50,000 a year for those 30 years. So during the course of your life working for the state, you start at 22, you retire at 52, you make $1.5 million gross, but you paid in. Let's say you paid in 13% of everything you made into your pension plan. So you put in $6,500 a year for each of your 30 years. That's over the course of your 30 years. You made 1.5, you paid your taxes, you lived, you raised your family, but you put $195,000 into your retirement system. If you are today 52, actuaries will tell you, life studies will tell you, demographic reality will tell you, your odds of living to 92 are very high, remarkably high. You may live beyond that. Let's just say you live to be 92 years old. Between the ages of 52 and 92, your years of retirement, let's just say you're not pulling out as much, although we have allowed people to do things like high 3s and high 5s and rolling sick days and rolling accrued vacation days and use this to spike their final income that allows them to retire under the impression that they earned more on average over their lives than they did. And again, nobody's doing anything wrong by doing that. The legislature made these rules for people. They shouldn't have. They were actuarially unsound. So people have been able to game the system. So there are many people who in retirement make as much or more than they did during their average years of income while working for the state. It is rare that a person does not make more in retirement than they made on average over their careers. The average teacher, for example, last night this came up in a conversation, a teacher who has taught for 30 years, anyway, let's say KTRS, which involves anybody who's been in the KTRS system. It includes administrative, classroom, and others. The average retiree in Kentucky, and again, you can retire out of that system after 27 years. You hit the best multiples at 30 years. But if a teacher has taught, or someone in KTRS has taught for 30 years or more and is retired, the average check right now, as of last night, for a person with 30 years or more, retired from KTRS, $62,000 a year. And it goes up every year, automatic, guaranteed, with a COLA that's not contractually obligated, is not funded by anybody, but is outrageous to many to even talk about doing anything with. $62,000 a year is the average. $67,000 if you consider the health care benefit that is also included. There are many people in this room who don't make $67,000 a year who don't retire when they're 48, 9, 50, 51, 2, 3, 4, 5, who work until they're 75, never making that kind of money to pay for somebody who's retired. Is that fair? Is that unfair? You can decide that, but that's reality. That is reality. So let's say in that instance a person earned $50,000. It doesn't matter what they did. They could have done anything for the state. and they put in $195,000, and let's say they didn't maximize things such that they retire earning more than they had. Let's say they somehow didn't accrue all these things, and they only make $40,000 a year in retirement, even though they earned $50,000 on average. The truth and reality is those things are usually inverted. But let's say this person only makes $40,000 in retirement, which is closer to the actual average of what people across all our systems make. That person living from 52 to 92 is going to make $1.6 million in retirement. That assumes they don't have a COLA and that number doesn't go up. Let's just say that's flat. $1.6 million. And health care on top of that. Where does that money come from? Where do you, in the real world, save $195,000 and get $1.6 million back, work for 30 and draw more money over the 40 years of the rest of your life? Who in the real world gets this? Nobody. It's financially impossible to sustain. There are schemes that are often referred to that rhyme with things like schmonzi that describe these things when they're foisted upon people. It wasn't intended to be that. It wasn't. It wasn't started as that. It started when it was possible. But in the years that have intervened, as it became less obviously possible, nobody wanted to talk about it. When I ran, I put out what I called a blueprint for a better Kentucky. There were 7 things on it. One of them was this issue. I said we have got to change the pension structure going forward. In my blueprint for a better Kentucky, which I was the only candidate willing to put things in writing, and it was published and it was handed out everywhere I went, and it was on my website, and I talked about it in every debate. I talked about how we have to change structurally the defined benefit plan and make it a defined contribution plan for future employees. And people understood this was true, but they haven't liked the fact that we've actually moved on this. If we don't, the system is going to fail. Even if we do, the system may fail. It has never been done, as I said. This is the hard reality of where we are. If it fails, the amount of pain and suffering and angst that people are going to feel is going to be high. But there's no lack of precedent for it. Look what's happened in countries like Greece recently. Look what's happening right now in Venezuela. Look what's happened in places like Zimbabwe. Look what's happening right now in South Africa. Look what happened in the city of Detroit. What did those city and state workers make? Pennies on the dollar. The system collapsed. They had been promised the moon. They had contracts. It was owed to them, and the money was gone. There is no current statute that allows a state to declare bankruptcy, but there will be. Mark my words, because there are many states down at the bottom with us, New Jersey and Illinois, Connecticut, Rhode Island, California, many states in similar states of disrepair financially. This is why this matters. So if you care about this issue, you ought to be writing letters to the editor, talking to your friends and neighbor, writing letters to the justices that are going to make this decision, and tell them, give us a fighting chance. Give us a fighting chance. Because if 151 goes down, I wouldn't bet that you have legislators that have the stomach to go back to this well. I really wouldn't bet on it. Other questions, comments, thoughts? Yes, sir.
My name is Pat Withrow. I'm a retired cardiologist and I'm interested in public health and prevention. And I think you've addressed this before, but I just wonder, are there any specific plans to reduce our prison population and possibly get some of these prisoners from some counseling and some help?
I will answer that broadly, and thank you for the question. Is, as a retired cardiologist, the question he asked is, for the many people in our prison population in particular, are there things we can do, A, to decrease the number of people in our prison population, or B, find ways to get them help as an alternative to incarceration? Is that a fair restatement of your question? Those are good questions, and the answer is yes and yes. Let me speak to them broadly, and then I'm going to defer to two of my cabinet officials who live this every single day, who oversee our Cabinet for Health and Family Services and who oversee public protection in our detention centers. At the highest level, we have about 25,000 people in our state prisons. What's the right number? Is that about?
We've been as high as 25 as 2 months ago. We're down to 24 today.
Okay, 24,000. But the average person in our systems costs us about $25,000 a year. That's a lot of money. So many of these, especially in our county jails, I should say, and our state jails. About 75, 80, 85% of the people are in there for some drug-related crisis. Either the drugs themselves and the violation of a drug law, or maybe petty theft or something associated with stealing something to feed their drug habit. The cost of incarceration isn't curing them of that behavioral health issue and that addictive problem. We're not treating them. We're not fixing the problem. We're removing them for a period of time. We're not rehabilitating them, and we're not doing well at reassimilating them, which gets to the heart of your question. We absolutely, in the workforce, demands that we have more able-bodied men and women capable of going to work and being drug-free. But we could get much better return on our investment as taxpayers by taking some portion of that $25,000, investing it into preventative services and divergent services. When that person first finds themselves in an addictive state, to find them in a program that doesn't necessarily put them on a path into a prison. So it's critical that this be addressed. And the answer is yes, we are. And rather than me articulate it, let me let you hear directly. If you want, first of all, where do you go, John? John, who is our Secretary Tilley, John Tilley is our Secretary for Public Protection. Maybe you can speak to this, Public Safety and Justice. If you can speak to this briefly, and then Adam, if you want to add to this too from the healthcare side.
Dr. Withrow, hello. It's always good to see you. We've worked quite a bit together. And you bring up a great point. We have had as many as 25,000 people in prison this year. That's a state record. To give you some context. I grew up in the 70s. We had 3,000 people in prison and spent about $5 million. Today we'll spend $650 million and we have 25,000 people in prison. Our population has only grown a fraction of that prison population. In fact, 38% since the time I was a kid in the early 70s to now 700% growth in prison population at that time due to the drug pandemic, I would call it. To give you some perspective, we're 9th in per capita incarceration, 2nd in female per capita incarceration, more children, 33,000 impacted by incarceration than any other state in the country. Now, the good news, we clearly are leading in drug policy. We are leading in reentry. We are doing things to turn back this tide, Dr. Withrow, as you well know, again, and that is a testament to the legislature, to this governor, to the culture changing in Kentucky, to law enforcement, to those working in corrections, like we saw today, where reentry now begins at day one, where we're assimilating people back into society in ways that we have never done before. And that is a testament to a number of people. As to treatment, I'll let Adam take this ball. Adam Meyer, who's the secretary I've worked with for now almost 3 years into this administration daily, and folks like Van Ingram you work with in drug control policy, and many others in various cabinets. So we're working together in ways that other states aren't working together in, where they're not talking to one another. They're in various silos, and they don't speak to one another. But we do this every day through an effort called CORE, which is Kentucky's opioid response effort. And it's only called that because that's the driving force in the drug epidemic now are opioids. It's not only meth is still there, it's actually dangerous coming across our southern border in ways that it never has. Our overdose deaths are up, yes, because of deadly fentanyl, which is an opioid. 80% of the people still begin with a prescription pill when they move into heroin and fentanyl. We're working in ways that we're funding treatment in ways we never had. We have, again, 24,000 people in state prison, 48,000 on some type of supervision, and we're actively treating 6,000 people. We're in the throes of trying to revamp and rebuild so many divisions so we can double the number of people we treat right now. Go back 10 years, we're treating less than 10% of that number. In fact, in about 12 years, we've grown, in 2 years, the most growth, we've grown about 1,400% in terms of the people we actually treat, Dr. Withrow. Again, you know that. So again, I know there are many layers to this, and please ask me specific questions about it. I'd love to get in the weeds and talk about what exactly we're doing. But we're using the best practices. Let me say this. Again, under this administration, this governor has set a vision of what we want to be in Kentucky, and that's we want to be a state of first, we want to lead the country. We're the first state to limit prescriptions to opioids to 3 days. Why? Because the CDC says that opioids are addictive between 3 and 5 days. First state to do it. Took a lot of capital to get that done. First state to have syringe support program, southern state, because they work. Now 50 communities have these across the state. Local option, you decide. Public health, you decide. Cities and counties, Bob, decide together, Judge. We're the first state in the country to mandate the use of a prescription drug monitoring program where doctors can see what else you're prescribed, what other doctors you've been to. First state in the country, we had the gold standard called Casper. You've heard of it, right? It's a way to monitor opioids. But they weren't, no state was mandating that anybody use it, except us. We were the first. I could go on. But that's the kind of leadership you expect from us, because this is a pandemic. We're in the throes of it. People are dying. We had 72,000 Americans who lost their lives to opioid overdoses. And by the way, as a country, because of this drug pandemic, we comprise, I'll end with this and turn it over to Adam. We comprise 4.5% of the world's population. We consume over 90% of the opioids, and we also imprison 25% of the world's prisoners here in this country. This is not a solution, a prison cell, to this epidemic. That's what we're trying to make happen in Frankfurt. We're getting there. I'll turn it over to Adam and let him take it from there. He's done a wonderful job.
Adam Meyer is the Secretary for Health and Family Services.
And I'll keep it brief and happy to talk more about it afterwards as well, but I think the main thing that I would say we're focusing more on is evidence-based treatment. You know, as a cardiologist, as a doctor, you know, evidence-based treatment has advanced in medicine, right? That's we use randomized controlled trial. We're doing the same thing here in this cabinet. All of these agencies that we're working with are looking at the evidence, looking at the best practices, working with fellow partners to see, you know, how do we get more MAT? How are we able to get these resources in a way that we can prioritize them, not based on geography, not based on, you know, legislators, districts that we like. It's based on evidence. It's based on where the need is. It's based on what the best use of ROI, what the best ROI of those resources. And then it's working across these agencies holistically to understand that this is not a simple problem with a simple solution. You know, we're looking at things like, how do we invest in the workforce? How do we start from the time they're incarcerated, transitioning out, you know, whether it's inducing them with Vivitrol injections, pre and post release, but then making sure that they have resources so that we can, you know, if they need Medicaid, we can get them on Medicaid so they can continue that treatment until they're able to get established and get on their feet. And so it's really coordinating all of those efforts to make sure that we're addressing these members holistically, because it's an addiction issue. It's not just an addiction to an opioid, but there's underlying issues that are causing it. And so we need to address those root causes, and that's going to be things like making sure that we're getting people employed, getting them engaged in their communities, and that's why everything that we do has those components, whether it's Medicaid, community engagement requirement, whether it's you know, the reentry, and just coordinating those efforts all across the agencies.
Adam,
Thank you.
Governor, it's incumbent upon us. Adam, you want to touch on findhelpnowkentucky.org? Governor, you led that. You want to touch on that?
I mean, sure. I mean, if you know somebody who's wrestling with this, findhelpnowky.org. Make note of that. Findhelpnowky.org. That's a website that'll provide information. There's also an 800 number, which is actually 833-8KY-HELP. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's the number. 833-8KY-HELP. There will be people, that is manned by a live person many hours of the day. And it goes to direct information when there's not somebody answering it. We hope to get it to the point where it's 24 hours a day. But this will tell you about beds that actually exist, not only in your community, but somewhere perhaps nearby that you wouldn't have known about. These are things we're trying to do. The sad reality is we still are wrestling with us. For all these innovative things we've done, these are seeds that are just now going into the ground. It's going to take time to turn this back, but two things that were noted. One of the most powerful things that is the true antidote is a job. It's opportunity. It's economic hope. These are the kind of things that we owe to our fellow citizens, the kind of things that go back to united we stand and divided we fall. It isn't just the role of government. We have responsibility neighbor to neighbor to treat our neighbors as we would want to be treated, the golden rule. To love our neighbors as ourselves. It's as old and timeless as the scriptures, but it's deeper than that. We know it to be true. These are obligations that we have. This is a big problem in Kentucky and in America. But we also have to do things like at the federal level where you have simple, odd rules that say you can't have more than 16 beds in a single facility to allow people to be treated and be able to use any kind of federal dollars and Medicaid or whatever the case might be. Those things are also starting to change. And again, this state is leading the charge on SUDs, which is a substance abuse disorder waivers from Medicaid and things of this sort. So there's a lot that's starting to change, and I appreciate you bringing it up. We've got a couple more minutes, and there's 2 questions in the back, and 3 questions. You, and then you. Yes, sir.
Governor Bevin, I know from a previous conversation with you that you're familiar with the Remington Arms plant that is empty down in Mayfield. I'm wondering if there's any activity on finding another employer to fill that space and bring those 200 jobs back to Mayfield.
I'd love to see it. I don't have personally involvement, but let me ask our economic development folks, do you know of a specific conversation related to that facility?
We do not, Vivek and I have toured the facility.
And this is Terry Gill, who's the Secretary for Economic Development.
And so we have an active database where any inquiry that comes into the cabinet, we match it against available properties. So we know it's there, we just haven't found the right fit just yet.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
My name's Mike Muscarella, and I work at Baptist Health, and I also serve on many health coalitions in the Purchase. And my question is about smoking. We have the highest smoking rate in the nation, and it affects the health of the Commonwealth. And I was wondering if the legislature and your office would support a statewide smoking ban and increasing the tax on a pack of cigarettes so it's within parity to the surrounding states. Number one, to help reduce people wanting to buy cigarettes, especially children. And number two, raise money for the government, but also reduce the amount of people smoking, which would reduce our healthcare costs.
These are very good questions. I think because he was in the back, you all heard it, so I won't repeat it. Specifically as it relates to smoking, 2 things. Would the state consider, would I and anyone in the legislature support a statewide smoking ban? The answer is, for myself, I'm not going to lead the charge on that. I think this is a local issue. There's no question. It's irrefutable, the connection between smoking and the health issues that plague us as much or more than any other state. No question. We lead the nation. We're in the top 2 or 3 in things like cardiovascular disease and lung cancer and things of this sort, premature death and things of this sort. So these things, there's no question there's correlation. But the reality is we try to do these things with things like prohibition. If the federal government starts to mandate certain things can't happen that are actually legal, especially in other places, it's like squeezing a balloon in some measure. These things should be done at a local level. And indeed, you've seen this happen within certain communities, cities, counties, what have you. And that's what I think should be. This is the smaller scale of government. Localized government is better on this front. But one of the things that you also asked about is, what about increasing the cost per pack on cigarettes in terms of tax to at least be on parity with surrounding states? It's a good question. And indeed, in this last legislative session, you saw 50 cents more be added. But the amount of, and Senator Carroll can speak to this, there were many that wanted that to be higher than that, as in double that. That would have brought us a bit more in line with some of the states around us, or at least most of those, Virginia being one big outlier of an exception. But there was tremendous amount of pushback from different corners for reasons that you've probably heard or could imagine. The net result was it was cut in half, but 50 cents actually brings us much more in line with a number of the states around us as well. I think Missouri is actually still pretty low also, isn't it? I think on both ends of us, I think they're quite a bit lower than us. But it isn't, I will say this. The point of this, some say, well, think of all the money we could make. I'll tell you, if we're trying to capitalize and monetize on our health issues, we're missing the point. Your point is this isn't about making the money. It's about how we dampen the enthusiasm for something that has such devastating health impact. And there's nothing that could be said, no study that's been done, that would refute the points that you're making. There just isn't. So we do have that obligation. The question is, will people within our legislature lead on this? And I think the answer is yes, they have in the past. We have doctors and others who care about this passionately, people from the healthcare community. And so I do believe that will continue to be an effort going forward. Specifically in what form and out of which side of the legislature, I can't predict. But I'm telling you, we have people in both the House and the Senate who are healthcare professionals as their livelihood, who care passionately about this and share the same concern that you do. So, and I will be supportive of this, of the fact that we need to be smarter about the way we approach this. Because whether it's hypertension or diabetes or lung cancer or any obesity, all these things that we've talked about that have a lot of correlation to some of the personal health decisions that we make, we've got to be more attentive than we've been historically as a state. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is John Levi. I have a question about your vision for engineering and manufacturing in Texas. Do you plan to incorporate like builder spaces and similar organizations that promote quantitative thinking and ingenuity through free or low-cost classes, camps, and workshops to achieve your goals?
Sure, these are good questions. I think you heard the question, but as it relates to creating the vision for Kentucky, for engineering and manufacturing, what is it we're going to do from encouraging ingenuity and innovative spaces where people can collaborate and use a variety of disciplines from both the arts and the sciences to find ways to move this vision forward? Is that a fair assessment of your question?
That's about it.
Okay, great. So the answer is yes. And in fact, we have spent when I first was elected, this was a passion of mine, exactly what you've talked about. How many of you in this room have ever been in Louisville? There's something called First Build. Have you ever had a chance to go to First Build? A number of you have. A few of you have. I would encourage you, if this is something you're passionate about, to go into a place called First Build. And it's a collaboration between the University of Louisville and General Electric. It is the embodiment of exactly what you're talking about. And I saw this some years ago when it was first opened, and I said, this is something we should do more. I wasn't in government at that time. But when I became elected, I said, I want to take $100 million that the state will put up if, in fact, people can apply for it and prove to us that they have ideas to do exactly what you've just said. Not building new space, per se, or buildings, or hiring necessarily people just for the sake of hiring them, but focusing them on exactly what you've just asked about. So I said, let's take $100 million, but in order to compete for it, know two things. Number one, the state's not going to pay 100% of your idea no matter how good it is. And it takes three groups to work together to apply for that money. It takes the local high school, the local post-secondary school, and the local business community. All three to work together to jointly talk amongst themselves as to what idea they need. Where can we invest money to do exactly what you described? And if they put in an application, then the state will consider that and will fund up to $100 million worth of these ideas, knowing that some of their monies will also be put in. The net result of that was this. This was passed and done 2 years ago. Since that time, we've put that $100 million because we had $540 million worth of applications. So it's not just you. A lot of people have a passion for this. $540 million. So we were only able to fund the best 18% of those, but we were able to. And of that $100 million, it was matched by local dollars and corporate dollars in the business community by another $150 million. So $250 million, $250 million in the last 2 years in Kentucky have gone into funding programs exactly like this, scaling up ones that exist. Again, analogy I used earlier as it related to these healthcare things, these are seeds in the ground. They're not producing the kind of fruit we want yet, but they are starting to germinate. They're coming up, and they're going to produce tremendous fruit in the future because it's critical. It isn't just the science side of it. You have to have the ingenuity because the half-life of technology is incredibly short, and things are changing so quickly in the 21st century. You have to be critical thinkers. You have to exercise that artistic side of your brain as well. And that includes not waiting till college, but starting down in high school. So we've also implemented something called dual credit training. That's something else where now kids are able to get dual credit while in high school and in college. I met a young woman a couple of weeks ago who already has her associate's degree and she's still in high school. She hasn't officially met her requirements to graduate from high school yet, but she already has an associate's degree that's been paid for by the taxpayers. That's the purpose of public education. That is exactly the point, is to create what Thomas Jefferson referred to as virtuous citizens, people that were productive and contributing members of society. This is why we use taxpayer money for education at the earliest levels, to your point, or to the highest levels. So it is coming, it's happening. I would encourage you, just based on your question and your seeming inclination, if you find yourself in Louisville or even to make a point of going there and go to First Build, plan to spend a few hours. It will blow your mind. It's awesome. And we're starting to replicate things like that in Eastern Kentucky, the Eastern Kentucky Advanced Manufacturing Institute, the ECOMI Institute, that's repurposing people and training them in advanced manufacturing type jobs. So there's a lot of these things that are starting to pop up and scaling programs, including at institutions exactly like this, coming along and taking things that already exist that are producing people like you and figuring out how can we scale those things up. So it is happening, hundreds of millions of dollars. And again, we're going to bear the fruit of this in the years ahead, and it'll be good for us. I think time is somewhat up, I'm being told. It's 3:45. Maybe there's time, if there's anybody else has a last question. Yes, ma'am. Hey.
Because I think you've explained the entire government to the point
that you're exhausted and want me to stop.
I'll understand it very well, but I don't know if you remember, maybe the first time you were on this campus.
Yeah.
We invited you to speak to a group
A bunch of young people that were not, yeah, absolutely, I remember it well, in the auditorium.
kids, middle school, high school age, and you have a lot of kids, so you know, kids are natural bull detectors. So they could tell immediately after 5 minutes listening to you, that you were somebody they can understand the government and appreciate what you're doing and campaign for you, as you well know. They were sad that you lost that election, but became pretty glad later on. Because they all think that you make you were born to be governor. So they appreciate it, we appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I will say this, again, it's an honor for me to have this job. It is, for those of you, how many people in this room have been an elected official at any level, and elected to office? So a lot of people in this room. For those of you and for your spouses and family, you understand it's a pretty thankless task. It really is. And for those of you who've not done it but would imagine it to be thankless, it's more so than you would even imagine. I can tell you. And every person who's in office, from Senator Carroll to Judge Leeper and others, I mean, will back me up on this. You know, we've got multiple judge executives in here. How many of you, there's at least 3 that I see. If you're a judge executive, raise your hand real quickly. So I guess it is just the 3 of you that I see. I mean, what the job that you all have right now in your respective counties is not an easy one. It's not. And so to that end, you know, Kevin, I remember when I first met you when you were first running, trying to swim upstream politically in a county where there was no expectation that you would ever win. But as a former military guy and a guy who's not, you know, willing to quit, I think of the conversations you and I have had about road projects that have been promised for decades that are now finally getting done. And you and I, conversations, I once, you know, forgot, I'm a concealed carry guy. I was going into a meeting with him, and it started pouring just as I got to the building. And of course, there's security there, and I realized I was going to get myself into some trouble. And I had to go back through the pouring rain to encumber myself and then come back to meet him, soaking wet. So I've had a lot of interaction with you guys on different fronts. Yours is not an easy job. It's not. And I'm grateful to you. But I'm grateful to those of you who have afforded me this opportunity. I appreciate your comments. And the fact is this, it isn't fun, it isn't easy. I didn't expect it to, I didn't sign up for that. I don't say it begrudgingly, I say it as a statement of fact. But there are things that have to be done, hard things, unpleasant things. Some of you remember when I did my State of the Commonwealth address, I put a cartoon up on the screen behind me. And there were 2 booths. And there was a person at a booth, there was a banner over each one. And there was a long line of people snaking in line waiting to speak to the person at one booth, and the other person had nobody in line. The one that had the long line of people was a booth, the banner of which was entitled Comforting Lies. Everybody wants the comforting lies. The other banner said Unpleasant Truths. Nobody wants the unpleasant truth. We're at a point in Kentucky, in America, in our respective counties and communities, in our own homes and our own businesses, where the unpleasant truth has got to be addressed. It isn't fun, it isn't pleasant, but it's got to be done. And it truly is an honor for me, and it's a privilege. I've been blessed to live the American dream. Many of you know my life. I won't tell it to you all in its entirety other than to say, as a kid who grew up in poverty, well below the financial poverty level in this country, to have been blessed to have grown up sharing a room with 3 brothers in an unheated house just south of the Canadian border, raising crops and animals and living in a very Spartan way, to find myself afforded the honor and the responsibility of being the governor of a state that I didn't grow up in, but have chosen to live in as an adult, is something that I take very seriously. As a military veteran, having served, and I know there's others in this room that have done it, but I've served alongside guys that are dead, guys that were my age when they died. They died in this nation's uniform. Their children have grown up without a father. The American dream is a real thing. For those of you students here, I hope you recognize just how blessed you are to live in the 21st century in America, to have the opportunities available to us, every single one of us, whether you're a student here or not. The American dream is a real thing. I see other people in this audience that I met for the first time in other countries on the other side of the world as we were trying to get through the embassy process and the adoption process. How crazy is that? It's amazing what a small world it is, but all of this is possible in America. It's possible in Kentucky. The American dream is real, and this is why I do it. This is why they do it. It's why Senator Carroll does it. It's why people are willing to fight to preserve this for those that are going to follow us. We owe our children and grandchildren nothing less. 1.5 million people have died in uniform so that we can freely assemble, so that we can talk about whatever we want, so we can agree or disagree, so that we can have public discourse, that we can have freedoms of assembly and of the press and of religion and of speech and of things that we take for granted. All these things are worth fighting for. Even Siri agrees, apparently, from the front row here. They really are. These are things worth fighting for, and this is why we do it. So I'm grateful to you for the opportunity. We don't have all the solutions. We don't have it all figured out. We're never going to. We're all flawed people. We all have our strengths. We all have our weaknesses. We have our shortcomings. But collectively, together, united we stand and divided we fall. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it.